Hey everyone, it's Phil Hall of Westrayer Communications, and thank you for joining us on this week's video conversation. Today, the subject is the cannabis industry in the US, and our guest is somebody who knows an awful lot about that subject. It's Serge Chistov. You're the chief financial partner with Honest Marijuana Company, that's correct?
Absolutely, sir.
What is the Honest Marijuana Company?
Honest Marijuana Company is the grow and production operation in the northwestern part of Colorado that was set up with the purpose of reaching out to produce and deliver to the customer the best possible organic cannabis experience that we know how to, using the most recent technology and production innovations. But the goal is show us the best and don't show us anything.
Okay. Well, obviously, Colorado was the first state to legalize marijuana. Where are we today in the US in terms of the legalization of marijuana?
I believe that majority of the markets already made their decision. If I'm not mistaken, we're over 20 markets with some kind of a recreational, medicinal, or decriminalization process. And expectation in the industry that within the next 3 to 5 years, we should have majority of the states on board, if not federal legalization.
Okay. When, as I'm not mistaken, when Colorado had legalized marijuana, there were a lot of naysayers who felt that crime would go up dramatically if this happened. What is the situation like in Colorado? Is there a higher crime rate because marijuana is legal?
I don't believe that marijuana as the product attributed to any change in crime balance. Black market on cannabis still exists and well. Taxation is quite hefty and healthy, so that gives a room for the black market. So if we discount simply black market that was here before and now, most of the trouble that industry have seen as far as the crime concerned probably was our still inability to have a full access to the banking system, and because of that, possession at some times over the quite large sums of the cash money. So that brought some spike in cannabis-related crimes. As far as the state anticipation or warriors anticipation that driving while intoxicated will create more damage on the roads and damage to the people that are not partaking, that has not been the case. However, we did see a little bit more of ski slopes in Colorado damage when tourists that are not familiar with the product or just over eager to try it sometimes present a little danger to themselves and to the other skiers or snowboarders.
Oh, that must be the idea of skiing while stoned doesn't seem very smart. What about vehicular problems? Obviously, we have DUI and DWI for those who tend to drink a bit too much and get in the car. Is that also a problem for those who smoke pot and get into the car?
Understanding of the industry is it all really depends on your level of the exposure and experience with the cannabis. I do not believe that cannabis affects um, a, a constant user to the same effect that it was affect a newbie. So the person that does not have an experience with cannabis, our recommendation is always go um, start low and go slow. But again, some people coming to vacations, they're very excited of access to some new idea. They relate it to their college experiences, which was giggly and fun. Occasionally end up taking on themselves a little bit too much of the cannabis exposure. And yeah, at that time, they might be a damage to some parking structures, but I don't believe in that condition people will go into the mountains and drive unless they're looking for trouble.
Okay. I didn't try that in college, which may explain why those years were not giggly and fun for me. So I think I missed something. What is, in terms of the industry itself, how big is the cannabis industry in the US today?
Most recent estimates are putting it anywhere between $6 to $9 billion in annualized sales, and this is a market that is recorded through the legalized and taxable transactions.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure on the black market involvement, but again, right now, no matter where you are, within a 1 mile of your house, there are handshakes and the purchases of cannabis happening as me and you speaking. So all of that is being grown or transferred or delivered somehow. It's just very difficult to quantify.
Okay. In terms of, you mentioned banking a few minutes ago. Uh, are cannabis-related companies able to do banking business with state-chartered banks as opposed to going with federally chartered banks?
I believe that every bank that has the FDIC, most of the banks, in order to have their charters, would need to have a federal connection. There is no state bank per se. There are banks that are operating more in one area or the other, and maybe have their capital structure based on the state regulations. But in general, they all have a piece of the FDIC regulation, and that puts them, basically their choice is it worth it for me? Do I want to do the extra compliance? Do I want to expose my bank and my branches to the cash influx of people that potentially might be robbed or stopped on my parking lot delivering that money to me? And most of the banks say no. So there is still very limited exposure to the checking or savings account. There is virtually no exposure to the classical borrowing or lending. And most of the industry is running on cash.
Wow. Is there any way to get around that? Are there any online banks or doing business with an overseas bank as opposed to an American bank? Or because of the FDIC, is that still the stumbling block?
I believe that, again, cash is the stumbling block. I mean, unless you're flying it on your plane to Bahamas, violating all kinds of federal and state regulations.
Yeah.
Are you asking me if people are creative in this industry? My answer is yes. But as far as legality, from my personal experience, most of our banking relationships originally was based on deceiving the bank of the nature of our business and being able to have an access to the banking account. As soon as bank catches up with it, they simply close the account, mail you a check. Today, we have a banking relationship that tells us when and how to operate. So it's a little bit upside down. And quite frankly, lending is still completely out of the question. So we do not have access to the same basic rights that any business owner in the US do. And that includes the PPE money for the interruption of the business during the pandemic. I mean, story can go for an hour. We don't have that much time.
No. Where is the subject of legalization in Washington today? I know that the Trump administration has not been enthusiastic about it. Has the Biden campaign made any statements on whether or not it supports legalization?
I do not believe that that was the case. I think Biden's from the Obama time is a cold memo guy who believes that states need to deal with that on their own and then want to force the decision from the federal side. So I don't believe anybody is ready to take an ownership. There is no agreement on the subject. And right now, even the banking regulations, which will allow us to have to bank, is being just an extra weight on some of the agreements between the Democrats and the bipartisan conversations on the relief package. So I don't believe that the matter is being taken seriously on the federal level.
Okay. In terms of growing cannabis in states where it is legal, either for medicinal or both medicinal and legal, are you seeing more cannabis farms popping up or more existing farms switching their crops over to growing cannabis?
No, regulation very clearly states that it needs to be, in most of the states, it needs to be separated from any other crop grown. Even hemp cannot be grown at the same facility as the cannabis. The issue is taxation. The only benefit for any state to jump in the game is the revenues that they see they're missing. So for them, they want to be very clear on that revenue, and they trying for you not to commingle your crops. In Florida, however, I believe that the prerequisite for you receive a license was your previous multi-year knowledge of nursery operations or having a nursery or growing operations for 20, 30 years. So they wanted to give it to the people that are more green thumb. And because of that, created very unfair marketplace for a lot of people that wanted to get involved.
Okay. How did you get involved in the cannabis industry, sir?
I'm a big believer of cannabis being a medicinal and spiritually beneficial substance for consumer. I do believe that the research that was abruptly interrupted by the political misunderstanding and by the general fear propelled since early 20s of last century, is nothing but a hypocrisy. I've been a follower and the consumer of cannabis most of my life. I mean, not recently, but that was a story of something that I really enjoyed. And in comparison to the alcohol, can draw my parallels and knowing what I like better. And for me, an opportunity to participate in something that I believed in was better, more like a labor of love rather than a labor from fear that I will not have to pay for my mortgage next year.
Mhm. What is the difference in the rules between cannabis in the United States versus Canada or the European countries?
Uh, Canada has a younger strategy, younger access to the cannabis. So they were looking at us developing our rules and regulations while observing it from the distance. I believe that government plays a larger role in Canadian cannabis business, like in most of the Canadian businesses. So there is a social element to it. Benefits are that some of the medicinal cannabis can be shipped through the mail legally, which simplifies delivery and kind of leaves that to the federally guided institution like Post. Um, Other than that, very similar grow ethics, except for the cost of electricity is extremely expensive in Canada. Taxes are quite high, and because of that, they grow in a lightly different style. They don't use high power lamps. They're using more of the LCDs. To me, as a consumer, that presents less of a ripe fruit. So quality might be a little bit less than what we used to in the States. Other than that, I think it's a pretty healthy way to conduct this business, and a lot of people are very successful. Europe, it's a mismatch. This is probably like a US in the beginning of 2000s when California was semi-legal, but nobody really knew the rules. Nobody knew how to get in or out of the business. Holland is still depends on the local regulations. It never was legal in Netherlands. It was really a touristy spot where a local cop can close your facility based on him disliking something you say or do. So I believe that the US today has one of the better legal tax and the business structure for the industry out of the entire world.
Within the cannabis industry, what are the growth sectors?
Good question. If you consider auxiliary businesses as a technology to grow, this has been really exciting run for a lot of people. A lot of smart people came back to work on lights, air conditioning system efficiency, watering. Nutrients became a big and essential part, and a lot of money being right now directed towards find the right healthy combination of nutrients for this plant specifically. So we no longer tell the nutrient company that we're growing a lot of tomatoes and we're looking for the certain qualities. Um, Within the industry itself, I believe the concentration was on edible experience to take delay in the reaction from the edible experience. You know, what I mean by that is activate the experience quicker so customer can manage his perception of what his experience is without a delay, because that caused a lot of problems for people that did not want to smoke, but they were not exposed to the edibles enough to know how to safely use it. They did not know their dosages. So efficiency of the delivery of the cannabinoids in the human body was the big research and investment for the last year and a half or two. And very exciting products are coming out of it right now.
Excellent. Are you involved in the CBD industry with your work?
Yes, I am.
And what is the state of CBD today in the United States?
Total confusion. Consumers looking for these three letters. Everybody knows that CBD is good, but if you look at the retailers like Amazon and Walmart, you cannot find CBD online. So the only place where you find CBD is the local mom and pop, which are doing it in a semi-legal basis, because the legality of the CBD is as follows. This is mine and my attorney's understanding and interpreting the law. Because of the GW Pharma coming out with the FDA approved product, which has the active ingredient CBD,
Mhm.
this is no longer into the non-federal jurisdiction. So you can no longer take CBD, add it to your honey, and sell it as a CBD honey. That would be the same thing as take an active ingredient from the Viagra, put it in the honey, and say, I have a Viagra honey. Same thing. Absolutely the same thing. Yet nobody seems to believe or understand it. Customer demands CBD because they heard it's great. And quite frankly, even the fact that they heard it's great is partially untrue. But again, American consumer knows what American consumer knows, and that's what makes it an American consumer.
Wow. So where do you see cannabis industry heading into the remainder of this year and throughout the decade ahead of us?
I believe the federal legalization, through the more states getting involved and figuring out their own participation rate, development of the boutique and unique delivery systems, transdermal applications. I mean, it's heading more to merge with the pseudo-pharma way, while pharmaceutical companies right now desperately trying to find what is that they can patent and create that I will not be able to recreate just owning my seeds and access to the land. So it's going to be a very interesting conjunction of two related industries where one learns from another, and we're trying to get to the top, which would be cannabis available to an adult responsible consumer as easy as, I don't want to use the word Advil because it would be a very bad example, but as easy as vitamins or minerals, or maybe some step above this where you would need to go and speak with the representative of the pharmacy and maybe show a prescription. So it's a combination of the two.
Do you think that eventually the case of legalization would be before the Supreme Court? Because lately it seems the only way things ever get done in this country is through the Supreme Court, because the Congress isn't passing a lot of controversial laws.
Of course, I would agree with you and that thinking. However, I do believe that the priority of cannabis on the level of the Supreme Court and the Congress is just not there. And I don't know why. I mean, money will tell me that part of the senators probably getting their bribes from the illegal cannabis trade or illegal drug trade, or they getting some of their, I don't want to use the word bribe, it sounds negative, but let's call it a lobbying dollars.
Okay.
And that was always to be a measure of the direction of how politics thinks. So if this is the case, for as long as they can hold on to this cash flow, they will. If it's not, it's just a matter of other priorities that this country is facing, and cannabis is just not on the top of that list.
Well, Serge, we've come to the end of this particular episode, but if our viewers want to continue the conversation with you, how can they get in touch with you?
I believe that they can send us requests at the info@honestmarijuana.com or serge@honestmarijuana.com. All of it will come to our admin, and we will be more than happy to reply.
Excellent. Serge Chistov of Honest Marijuana Company, thank you so much for being a guest on today's episode.
Thank you for having us on, Phil.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. We'll see you again next week, folks. Take care.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.